A new diplomatic tension is unfolding between the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, and the United States, drawing strong attention across Africa and the wider world. In a firm and carefully worded response, AES leaders have pushed back against recent comments and actions from Washington, signaling a growing divide between the Sahel region and Western powers. The moment marks an important shift in Africa's geopolitical landscape and highlights how power relations are changing in a rapidly evolving world. The Alliance of Sahel States is made up of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, three countries currently led by military governments that came to power after coups in recent years. These nations formed AES as a security and political alliance, saying they wanted to protect their sovereignty, coordinate defense efforts, and reduce dependence on foreign influence. Since its creation, AES has presented itself as a united front, determined to speak with one voice on international issues. The latest tension began after the United States raised concerns about governance, security cooperation, and foreign partnerships in the Sahel. American officials emphasized the importance of democracy, human rights, and transparency, while also warning about the growing influence of non-Western actors in the region. These statements were seen by AES leaders as interference in internal affairs and a lack of respect for their political choices. In response, AES issued a strong message rejecting what it described as pressure and double standards. Leaders of the alliance said their countries are facing serious security threats and have the right to choose partners and policies that serve their people's interests. They stressed that sovereignty and national dignity are not negotiable, and that external powers should listen more and lecture less. This exchange is important because it shows how relations between Africa and traditional global powers are changing. For decades, the United States and its allies played a major role in security and development efforts in the Sahel. Today, that influence is being openly questioned. AES's response signals that some African governments are no longer willing to accept criticism without pushing back publicly. The situation also matters beyond diplomacy. The Sahel is a key region for global security, migration, and trade. Any breakdown in cooperation between the United States and Sahel states could affect efforts to fight armed groups and stabilize the region. At the same time, AES leaders argue that past partnerships failed to bring peace and new approaches are needed. Part 1 of this story sets the stage for a deeper look at why AES reacted so strongly, what this confrontation reveals about Africa's changing role in world politics, and how this moment could shape future relations between the Sahel, the United States, and the international community. The strong response from the Alliance of Sahel States did not come out of nowhere. It is the result of years of frustration, disappointment, and growing anger over how the region has been treated by powerful international partners. To understand why AES hit back so firmly at the United States, it is important to look at the recent history of the Sahel and the deep sense of failure felt by many leaders and citizens. For more than a decade, the Sahel has been one of the main focuses of Western security efforts in Africa. The United States and its allies provided military training, intelligence support, and funding to help fight armed groups. Despite this heavy involvement, violence continued to spread, displacing millions of people and weakening already fragile states. Many in the region began to question whether these partnerships were truly working. When military leaders took power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they did so by promising a new direction. They blamed previous civilian governments and foreign-backed strategies for the worsening security situation. Although these coups were criticized internationally, many citizens supported them, believing that strong leadership might finally restore order. Over time, this support grew into a broader rejection of outside pressure. American statements about democracy and human rights, while familiar, have increasingly been seen by AES leaders as selective and unfair. They argue that Western countries often overlook abuses by friendly governments while criticizing those that choose independent paths. This sense of double standards has fueled resentment and strengthened calls for full sovereignty. The formation of AES itself was a direct response to this feeling. By uniting, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger aimed to reduce isolation and show that they are stronger together. Speaking back to the United States as a bloc gave their message more weight and visibility. It was not just a reply to one comment, but a declaration of confidence and independence. The pushback also reflects changing global dynamics. As new international partners show interest in Africa, Sahel leaders feel they have more options. This has reduced the fear of punishment or isolation and encouraged bolder language. For AES, the message is clear: the era of quiet acceptance is over. This background explains why the current exchange feels so intense. It is about history, trust, and who gets to define Africa's future. In the next part, the focus will turn to how the United States is responding and what this clash reveals about America's position in a changing world.
The sharp response from the Alliance of Sahel states has placed the United States in a difficult position, forcing Washington to rethink how it engages with a region that is rapidly changing. For decades, the U.S. viewed the Sahel as a key partner in the fight against armed groups and instability. Now, that relationship is under serious strain, and the current exchange has become a test of America's influence and credibility in Africa. U.S. officials have repeated that their concerns are rooted in long-standing principles. They argue that democracy, human rights, and accountable governance are essential for lasting stability. From Washington's point of view, military takeovers and tight political control risk creating new problems, even if they appear to bring short-term order. American leaders also worry that reduced cooperation could weaken efforts to counter armed groups that threaten regional and global security. At the same time, there is growing recognition in U.S. policy circles that old approaches are no longer enough. The strong language used by AES leaders shows that messages once delivered behind closed doors are now being openly challenged. Analysts say this reflects a wider shift in Africa, where governments are more willing to publicly defend their choices and demand equal treatment. The United States has so far avoided escalating the dispute. Officials have spoken carefully, emphasizing dialogue and continued engagement rather than confrontation. However, the tension is clear. Trust has been damaged, and rebuilding it will not be easy. Any move by Washington to apply pressure, such as reducing aid or cooperation, could push AES countries further away. This moment also raises questions about competition in Africa. As U.S. influence faces challenges, other global actors are stepping in with different messages and partnerships. American policymakers are increasingly aware that criticism alone may no longer shape outcomes. They must balance values with realism in a world where African states have more choices. For the people of the Sahel, the outcome of this standoff matters deeply. International cooperation affects security, development, and humanitarian support. A breakdown in relations could make life harder for millions already living under extreme pressure. This shows that this is not a simple argument, but a turning point. In the next part, attention will shift to Africa's broader response and how other countries and institutions are reacting to the growing confidence and defiance shown by AES.
The confrontation between the Alliance of Sahel states and the United States has sparked intense discussion across Africa. Governments, regional organizations, and ordinary citizens are closely following the exchange, seeing it as a sign of a new and more confident Africa that is no longer afraid to speak back to powerful global actors. At the same time, the situation has exposed deep divisions over how the continent should balance sovereignty, democracy, and security. Some African leaders and political movements have openly supported AES, praising the alliance for defending national dignity and rejecting external pressure. They argue that African countries have the right to choose their own paths without being lectured by foreign powers. For these supporters, AES represents a broader movement toward independence in decision-making and a break from decades of unequal relationships. Other African governments have taken a more cautious view. They worry that open confrontation with the United States could isolate the Sahel and weaken regional cooperation. Many depend on international partnerships for trade, development funding, and security support. These leaders fear that strong rhetoric could reduce trust and make it harder to solve shared problems, such as armed violence and economic hardship. Regional bodies, including ECOWAS and the African Union, find themselves in a delicate position. On one hand, they support African sovereignty and unity. On the other, they're concerned about military rule and the long-term stability of the region. The AES response to the United States adds another layer of complexity to already strained regional relations. Among ordinary Africans, reactions are equally mixed but deeply emotional. Many young people, in particular, see AES's pushback as a long overdue stand against what they view as double standards in global politics. Social media platforms are filled with debates about pride, independence, and whether Africa is finally finding its voice on the world stage. This moment matters because it reflects a change in attitude. Even countries not directly involved are paying attention, measuring how far African states can go in asserting themselves without facing serious consequences. The outcome will influence how future disagreements between Africa and global powers are handled. As Africa watches closely, one thing is clear: the balance of power is shifting and old rules are being questioned. In the next part, the focus will turn to the real-world impact of this diplomatic clash on security, economies, and the lives of people in the Sahel and beyond.
Beyond political statements and diplomatic language, the clash between the alliance of Sahel states and the United States carries real consequences for security, economies, and everyday life in the region. The Sahel is already one of the world's most fragile areas, and any change in international relations can quickly affect conditions on the ground. Security is the most urgent concern. For years, cooperation with the United States provided intelligence sharing, training, and logistical support in the fight against armed groups. As relations cool, there's uncertainty about how much of this cooperation will continue. AES leaders argue that past support did not stop violence and that new strategies are needed. However, security experts warn that reduced coordination could create gaps that armed groups may exploit. The economic impact is also significant. U.S. involvement in the region has included development aid, humanitarian assistance, and support for basic services. Any reduction or redirection of this support could put pressure on already struggling economies. Inflation, unemployment, and food insecurity remain major challenges, and diplomatic tensions can make it harder to attract investment and maintain stable trade relationships. Humanitarian organizations are watching closely. Millions of people in the Sahel depend on international aid for food, shelter, and medical care. If political disagreements disrupt funding or access, the most vulnerable will suffer first. Aid groups stress that humanitarian needs should not become victims of geopolitical disputes. At the same time, AES leaders see this moment as an opportunity. They believe that standing firm could encourage new partnerships and greater self-reliance. By reducing dependence on traditional donors, they hope to build systems that are more resilient and better aligned with national priorities.
Whether this vision can be achieved remains an open question. For ordinary citizens, the impact of this standoff is deeply personal. Security determines whether children can attend school, farmers can work their land, and families can live without constant fear. Economic stability affects food prices and access to basic services. Diplomatic choices made today will shape these realities tomorrow. So this shows that there is not just a war of words. It is a moment that could reshape daily life across the Sahel. In the final part, attention will turn to what lies ahead and how this confrontation may redefine Africa's place in global politics.
As the exchange between the Alliance of Sahel states and the United States continues to unfold, the region now stands at a defining crossroads. What happens next will not only shape relations between AES and Washington, but could also influence how Africa as a whole engages with global powers in the years ahead. This moment is about more than diplomacy. It is about confidence, choice, and the future direction of international partnerships. For AES, the challenge will be to turn strong words into real results. Defending sovereignty and independence is a powerful message, but citizens will judge success by improvements in security, jobs, and daily life. If the alliance can deliver stability and development, its stance will gain lasting legitimacy. If not, pressure from within may grow, forcing leaders to rethink their approach. For the United States, this moment calls for reflection. Africa is changing, and traditional methods of influence are losing power. Future engagement may depend less on lectures and more on listening, respect, and equal partnership. How Washington responds will signal whether it can adapt to a multipolar world where African voices carry more weight. Across Africa, other nations are watching closely. The outcome of this standoff will help define how far countries can go in asserting independence without harming their own interests. It may encourage more open dialogue about fair partnerships and shared responsibility, or it could deepen divisions if tensions escalate. Globally, the Sahel's position remains critical. Stability in the region affects migration, global security, and economic connections far beyond Africa. This is why the world cannot ignore what happens next. Cooperation, even amid disagreement, remains essential. As history shows, moments of confrontation often lead to change. Whether this change brings greater unity, stronger sovereignty, and better outcomes for people will depend on the choices made now. The AES response to the United States has already sent a message heard around the world. The next chapter will determine whether that message becomes the foundation of a new era or a missed opportunity.